Good Sunday morning and welcome to Inside Tennessee. Along with my colleague John North, I'm John Becker, and we are focused on the race for U.S. Senate in Tennessee. Our guest this morning is Gloria Johnson. She is a representative in the State House, but running for the U.S. Senate against Republican Marsha Blackburn. It should be noted as we get started with this conversation, and Ms. Johnson, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the invitation.
We did put out an invitation to the Blackburn campaign, but at last check have yet to hear back, and that was several weeks ago. As we get started, I'm going to introduce our panel. On the end there is Don Bosch. He's a Democrat and runs his own law firm.
Good morning.
Good morning. Susan Richardson-Williams is a Republican, and she runs her own PR firm.
Good morning, John.
Nice to have all of you here. And Representative Johnson, let's start with the obvious. Why are you running for the U.S. Senate?
Well, because I believe that Tennesseans deserve better representation than they're getting right now. Tennesseans are, they're hurting right now. You know, they're struggling to survive, and I believe that we can be sure that all Tennesseans thrive. We have a U.S. Senator that currently is fine with a minimum wage of $7.25. Across the board, Republicans, Independents, and Democrats believe we should raise that wage. They might differ on what we should raise it to, but they want to raise it. Tennesseans are hurting right now because they don't have access to affordable health care and affordable prescription drugs. And we have a U.S. Senator who votes against capping insulin at $35, votes against negotiating drug prices for seniors, and has taken $2 million from Big Pharma. So Tennesseans need someone who's working for them, not lobbyists and corporations.
You brought up several specifics, and we'll hit on some of those issues. For a lot of our viewers, they're going to see you on the ballot twice because you are, in addition to running for the U.S. Senate, you are also running to retain your seat, District 90, as a representative in the State House in Tennessee. Some critics might say that's double dipping. If you had full confidence that you were going to be the U.S. Senator, why not throw it behind that race and not run for two at once?
You know, it's been the law in Tennessee forever that you could run for two seats, just not at the same level. So you can run for state and county or federal and county, you know. But that's been the way it is, and we have many Republicans who run at two levels as well. So the reality is, I wanted to run for U.S. Senate. I decided to make that run. The people in my district said, Gloria, we understand this is an uphill battle. We think you can do it, but we do not want to lose your voice in Nashville. So I am running to represent Tennesseans no matter what.
Gloria, along that line, and I don't have to tell you this, I imagine you've heard it before. Our good friend Susan reminds us of this. We live in what's still a very red state across the state of Tennessee, and you are a blue candidate. Your opponent calls you a socialist, among other things. How do you win? How do you sort of counter a tide like that and a perception like that?
Well, saying that I'm a socialist is just a lie. It's a fear tactic, and it's a lie. And so the reality is, Tennessee is not that red of a state. Tennessee is a non-voting state. We were less than 40% voting last time, and we've got to get people out to the polls. And what we are finding are people are fed up with the overreach. They're fed up on the attacks on women and their bodily autonomy. And Tennessee says that women are not equal, and they're not going to stand for that. And then we've got them overreaching with vouchers. It's utterly ridiculous. People do not support vouchers, just the folks at home. Knock on some doors, you'll find out. I mean, I have talked to so many Republicans and so many independents who are voting for us because they cannot stand what is happening, and they know that Marsha Blackburn is not working for them. And they want something different. They know that we can do better for hard-working Tennessee families.
Susan?
Well, I'd like to talk about some of the issues that are out there in this discussion on the federal level. I worked in women's athletics for many years at the University of Tennessee, and a lot of people in your party believe that boys or men who identify as girls or women should participate in women's sports. Where do you stand on that?
Well, you know, it's the same thing with, I thought that Republicans were small government. Because, you know, I had a brother who played sports. And when he played in high school, the people responsible, the experts in the sports, were the ones who decided who played and who didn't play. It shouldn't be a government official in the Tennessee State Legislature, probably an insurance salesman, who's never played a sport in their life. We need to let the experts in the field, the NCAA that governs, that governs those sports, the Olympic Committee that governs those sports, the experts in the sports, the experts in the biology of the sports, those are the folks making the decision, not people in the Tennessee House or Marsha Blackburn. We don't need them making decisions about sports. Let's go to the experts for that.
And Susan, as the other Democrat out here, I would disagree with your premise that many or most in my party believe that. We
I didn't
don't.
say.
We
I
agree
just
with Gloria.
I said some, many. Okay.
Many. No, it's not really many. I can tell you that now. I think there's a fairness argument to be made here, but what Gloria said is right. Let science rule, not a bunch of farmers and insurance people that are bigoted
Well,
and
it is
misguided.
happening, though.
It's
And
not
I'm
happening.
asking
It's
if
not
you
happening
believe
here.
that
It's a
it is
distraction.
appropriate.
This is a distraction in Tennessee. We passed a bill. It had not happened once. It's not happening in Tennessee. We are
you're
not
running for
seeing
the
it.
U.S. Senate,
but
Gloria.
but it is a distraction because it's not. If you listen to Republicans, you would think that's what's affecting families. That's not what's affecting families. What's affecting families is they can't keep the lights on. They have to work 2 and 3 jobs to keep the lights on and feed their families because Marsha Blackburn thinks $7.25 is okay because she doesn't believe they should have access to health care. She tried to repeal the ACA 4 times. And she doesn't want Medicaid expansion. She wants to make prescription prices higher. Those are the things that affect Tennessee families. But the fact that 2 women down the street are married has nothing to do with someone's family besides theirs.
We've got to take a quick break on Inside Tennessee. We'll talk more about those issues that you raised, and we'll be right back on this Sunday morning.
Continue with us and watch free now on the 10 Plus app.
Back on Inside Tennessee, our guest this morning, Representative Gloria Johnson, running for the U.S. Senate as a Democrat, taking on the incumbent Marsha Blackburn, who was invited to take part not just in this broadcast, but a one-on-one interview. That offer still stands as we talk to you this morning. You brought up the minimum wage at $7.25 an hour. What should it be and why?
Well, I think that that's where we differ. Republicans, independents, and Democrats all want it raised, but you differ on where it is. And I think I looked to the most recent MIT study, and it's an excellent study. If anybody wants to look it up, Google MIT living wage. And what it does, it breaks down what the living wage in every single county in the country. So I went to Tennessee and kind of looked at what the average was and looked at every county. And it's very interesting because sometimes the bigger, more urban counties are not the most expensive. Sometimes it's the rural counties where you have to make more. So it's a fascinating study. But the Tennessee minimum wage equals out to around $20 if you go across all counties. Now, I know a lot of people would say that's far too much, but that's what a living wage is. And the really cool thing about this calculator is it breaks it down into what you're spending on rent or mortgage, what you're spending on groceries, what you're spending on transportation, and then it's like if it's one person or a single person with a child or a couple with a child.
You can add variables. So if I understood you correctly, you think $20 is a reasonable amount for a living wage in this state?
I think $20 is what is a living wage. But I understand everybody's not there yet. I've written bills in the State House that have done something similar than other southern states did on the ballot, which is we start at 13 and we go up $1 each year. Mine, the one that increased, tied it to the cost of living. So it went up with the cost of living every year. So.
Well, I'll go back to another issue that's important to Republicans, as you say, and that's the border. We've had millions of immigrants come in, not legally at all times, and it is something that's certainly a huge issue in our country right now. Where do you stand on that? Are you for building a wall? Are you for closing the border? Are you keeping the border open? What's your stance on that?
I think the bill that they had, that the Republicans voted against, some Republicans voted against, most voted for. From what I heard from most Republicans, there was only one piece of that bill that they had issue with. And so I think that we start passing legislation to address it. I really feel like Republicans don't want to solve the issue because they want to use it to run on and scare people. But it's an issue that we need to fix. We need a path to citizenship, but we also need to process people appropriately and bring those in. And we are working on that. But if folks won't get together, we've had bipartisan legislation on that for years. But people are keeping it an issue instead of starting to work on it. And I believe we have got to pass good legislation. And I'm not going to say exactly what those things are. I know there was so much in place for more officers at the border and for more protections from keeping drugs from coming across the border. All of these things that were really Republican wish list, except for one item that they gave misinformation on. And my biggest concern is that we have a U.S. Senator right now in Marsha Blackburn who often lies about what is happening on the border, and it just divides our country. It does not bring us together. And 10 years ago, when I think of my Tennessee, it's you just work together to help your community, and it doesn't matter who you love or where you worship or any of those things, but we just pitch in and help our community. And the hate that has been sown is so divisive and so ugly, and it puts people in danger.
Just quickly, you mentioned your opponent lies about the border. Can you give us an example, since she's not here to defend herself?
Yeah, sure. Some of the numbers that she's saying or the reasons. The whole FEMA distraction thing about this money, we didn't have money in FEMA because it had gone to immigrants, and that's a bald-faced lie. And it was debunked in every major newspaper and on the FEMA website, but they continue and continue with it, and it's misleading to people, and citizens deserve the truth from their elected officials. I get so tired of talking to people who go, well, they're a politician, of course they lie. You should expect your elected leader to be more honest than the general public. You shouldn't expect them to tell lies.
I would point out she has been to the border several times in her capacity as a senator.
And I would point out that you don't fix the border by going to the border.
No,
you fix
but
the
you do need
border by
information.
going, but all that information, I mean, it's good that she went there. That's fine. But people focus on who went to the border, but you don't fix it by going to the border. You fix it by going to the countries and to have diplomatic relations with the countries where folks are coming from to work out that problem. And people always get stuck on who goes to the border. I would definitely go to the border if I was working for the federal government as a senator or representative. But I understand that that's not where the problem is solved. The problem is solved in the countries where folks are fleeing.
So let me, if we have time, change to healthcare, because you brought that up. And it really seems to me to be two-pronged for you. One, that deals with it on the state level and what you've had to deal with for many years. And two, what we would do on a federal level. We know on the state level that opting into the federal dollars for Medicaid, Medicare expansion is something that they won't do because they still tie it to, quote, Obamacare. It's a tragedy. It's our money and we won't take it. What would you do, though, on the federal level? Would you support universal health care, government-sponsored health care, hybrid? Tell us what you would do were you elected senator on the health care crisis in America.
I'm going to do what is smart and works well to make sure that everyone has access to affordable health care. It could be Medicare for all. It could be something like that, absolutely. I would have to see that legislation, study that legislation, but yes, I believe that health care is a right. And we know that Tennesseans die every year because of their lack of access to affordable care. And we know that Marsha Blackburn voted to repeal the ACA 4 times, which would have kicked 40 million people in this country off of their health care. We would have gone back to pre-existing conditions, keeping people from care. People like my sister, who went without insurance for a year and a half because she had a long-term illness and was kicked off of her insurance because she had a small business. Her and her husband had a small business. And that she finally got insurance back when the ACA, when the pre-existing condition portion of the ACA came back, and she was able to get the surgery that she needed, the MRIs that she needed. But she should not have had to wait for that new law. But it did. For a time, it saved her life and extended her life, and she had 2 sons. But this is what she wanted to repeal, and keeping your kids on your insurance until their 26th birthday. That would have gone away. And there was no plan. There was a concept of a plan, I hear.
We've heard that.
There was no plan to replace it. And so how can you care about Tennessee families and do something like that?
We've got to take another quick break on Inside Tennessee. Back with more of our discussion with Representative Gloria Johnson, again running for the U.S. Senate against Marsha Blackburn. We're back after this.
Continue with us and watch free now on the 10 Plus app.
Back on Inside Tennessee, we need to note that, yes, we're talking to Representative Gloria Johnson about her dual run to retain her seat in the State House, but also her run for the U.S. Senate. Marsha Blackburn, the incumbent U.S. Senator, was invited to this broadcast and other several one-on-one opportunities. We have yet to hear back from that campaign. We welcome a sit-down. John.
Gloria, I don't think it's sort of a controversial topic to say. A lot of people think that Congress is in dysfunction, cannot function very well, whether you're talking about the Senate or the House. Also, the leadership margins there are so tight in terms of which party runs. So here's my question. You, if you're elected to the Senate, how do you make that better? And you, who has a reputation, in Nashville as being kind of a maverick and somebody who will stand up and maybe isn't the greatest uniter versus just standing for what you think is right. How do you make a difference?
Well, I'll always stand for what I think is right. I will always stand against bigotry and racism and those kinds of things. But the reality is, more than 80% of the time, I vote the same as the Republicans vote. And people don't ever talk about that. They only talk about the times we're different. But more than 80% of the time, we vote the same. And so the reality is, Republicans have come to me, especially on education legislation, to say, hey, would you support this? What do you think about this? So, you know, the reality is, I have a professional relationship. I've never said anything rude on the floor. I've never yelled at anybody. I've never done any of those things. And as a matter of fact, I was on another Democrat's podcast in Memphis, and he said, I have never seen Gloria ever be rude to anyone in the legislature. So the reality is I will work across the aisle on legislation that benefits Tennesseans. You know, I was Tennessee Promise when Governor Haslam had Insure Tennessee. It wasn't exactly the plan we wanted, but it was a plan that still served almost as many people. So I was with that. If it's going to help the majority of Tennesseans, I'm with you. But the reality is, I'm not going to be with you on hate legislation and legislation that bans books, legislation that allows us to teach a whitewashed history, legislation that hurts people, and especially young people, this hateful anti-LGBTQ legislation that puts lives at risk because we know the suicide rates of LGBTQ children. So I'm not going to work with you on those things, but I'll work with you on anything that helps the majority of hardworking Tennessee families.
So, Gloria, you just indicated that, you really get along with a lot of Republicans. I think Cam Sexton might beg to differ. Our Speaker of the House,
Yeah.
your quote-unquote boss, I suppose. You could call him that maybe.
He's a colleague.
There you go. So, but you really rose to national prominence as part of the Tennessee Three.
Right.
And you were supposed to speak at the DNC at the convention.
Mm-hmm.
You were, unfortunately, you and the Justins were bumped. How do you think that experience has shaped you and helped you in terms of a national race, or at least a statewide race, for Tennessee Senate? And do you think that's helped you or hurt you across the state that is still a little bit redder than you and I might like?
Yeah. I think it's hard to judge. You know, it has hurt me with some, but so many people were misinformed, and that's the really sad part, the people who didn't watch. But it's also helped me some. I went into we did a 95 county tour. We went to every tour, advertised it, did it in comfortable places so anybody from any party would feel welcome coming. And a woman came in and she said, my husband's sorry he couldn't be here. She said, we are lifelong Republicans and he's more conservative than I am, but we are voting for you. She said, we watched all 3 of the hearings. We sat and we didn't even get up from the television. We watched all 3 of the hearings. And at the end of those hearings, my husband said, I'll never vote for a Tennessee Republican again.
Wow.
They saw it for what it was.
One other sort of technical point, were you to win the Senate seat, you obviously have to vacate your House seat. Am I correct in that the County Commission of Knox County would then appoint your replacement until the next election?
My understanding is they would appoint until there was a special election.
Right. And so are you concerned that the Knox County Commission is Republican majority controlled and that your rare Democratic seat in the state house would likely, at least for a brief period of time, go to a Republican who would have the power of incumbency, so should that person want to run, and maybe that seat gets lost back to the Republicans?
Well, there's not really much time at all before we would have a special election and we would have a Democrat in that seat.
Only 60 seconds left. Susan, I know you wanted to get to a numbers question.
Well, of course, you're for lowering the price of groceries and all these other things. I see that on your website. Yet you want to increase health care, you want public education, more money. How we pay for all this? We've got a horrible national debt. I mean, where's the money coming from to do all these things you want to do?
A budget is a moral document, and it tells what you care about and what you put first. And we should put people's livelihoods and people's health first. And so we can do that by taxing at a regular rate the wealthy in this country. It's already the
always
money.
the wealthy.
Well, it is because they're
But they already
undertaxed.
pay.
But they don't pay their fair share.
75% of all the taxes
They
in this
don't.
country.
That's one way to say it, but the other way to say it is they don't pay their fair share. They don't pay the same
that's not true,
percentage.
I hear
It is
from Biden, I
absolutely
hear it from
true.
Kamala. That is not true. The wealthy pay most of the taxes.
And
in
at a
this country.
percentage lower than the middle class.
Exactly.
Period.
That's a fact.
It's that
That is
easy.
not true.
And so, in addition to that, it's about your priorities, and we should be putting people first and not corporations, and that's a fact.
We're going to have to leave it there. Representative Johnson, we always appreciate your time. Thank you for making time to talk about your run for U.S. Senate.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
We're back with our talk around right after this. Back with our talk around on Inside Tennessee. John North, you were looking at the Beacon poll before this discussion, which gives a sense of where this race is, at least from their poll's perspective.
Focuses on the state of Tennessee, and it came out just a couple weeks ago, and it says Marsha Blackburn's about 23 points ahead. Believe that, don't believe that. It is a high hill for Gloria to climb.
Susan, how does she climb it, and what do you expect this race will shake out like?
Well, I think Marsha Blackburn's going to win, and probably by 20 points or so. I'll give Gloria kudos for running for 2 seats. Republicans should have certainly put an opponent up against her in that House seat, and I blame them for not doing that. But, you know, she's running, and said kudos to her for doing it.
As John mentioned, a bit of a maverick as she's seen in this state, and has been a champion for healthcare and education. Don, what's your perspective on this race?
Well, margins matter, and I'm not going to sit here and think that Gloria has a good shot of winning, but there is something that I've talked about lately called the low propensity voter. It got Trump elected in 2016. People that don't vote, that decided to come out and vote because they were energized. I think the women's reproductive health care issue, the gun issue, the education issue, all matter, and I think we're going to see some of those, and I think they're going to be largely women and a slightly younger skew from what we've seen come out and vote, and that's going to shrink this margin. Is it going to shrink it by 20 points? I don't know, and I don't think so, but if these margins shrink, it will tell Democrats, whether it's Gloria in the future or the next wave of Democrats, that they can compete in these races. So just to say, kudos to Gloria for running. It's important. I hope she wins, and we'd be better for it if she did.
We've got a lot of people turning out to vote. We know that. We're in early voting, and every time I've been by downtown West, there's 300 or 400 people in line.
Yeah, which is encouraging no matter how it shakes out.
I don't know who they are.
Yes.
Have no idea who they are. But
If they
there's a
think
lot.
by early voting they're wishing away the ads and what have you.
Could be that.
They
Could
are
be that,
living
yeah.
under a false wish.
Well, I'm tired of seeing dishes broke, so.
Yeah, we appreciate you watching this Sunday morning. Hope you have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll see you right back here next week on Inside Tennessee.